They called it science, but it was pure torture. Have you ever wondered how far humans would go in the name of science? Throughout history, the pursuit of knowledge has occasionally crossed borders so black that the term science is nearly unrecognizable. Under the guise of research and advancement, regular men and women, doctors, psychiatrists, and military officers conducted experiments that caused unthinkable bodily and psychological anguish. These are not fictional stories, but terrible accounts of actual human misery committed in laboratories, hospitals, and even schools. The following are 5 of the most alarming incidents in which science was used to justify cruelty. Unit 731, Japan, 1936 to 1945. In the cold plains of northeastern China, buried near the city of Harbin, lied one of World War II's darkest secrets. Facility 731, an Imperial Japanese Army research facility. It was officially known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, but thousands of men, women, and children were tortured and slaughtered behind its walls in the name of military science. Established in 1936 by General Shiro Ishii, Unit 731 aimed to enhance Japan's biological warfare program by studying human endurance and infection. The victims, predominantly Chinese civilians, but also Russians, Koreans, and prisoners of war, were referred to as maruta, which means logs. They were regarded as disposable specimens rather than as humans. Scientists purposefully afflicted them with plague, anthrax, cholera, and typhus to investigate how these diseases devastated the body. Vivisections, which involve cutting individuals open without anesthesia, were common because surgeons could witness organ degradation in real time. Limbs were frozen until frostbite developed, then thawed or cut away to investigate gangrene. Others were subjected to high-pressure chambers, chemical weapons, and grenade blasts to study injury patterns. It is thought that thousands died within the plant, and hundreds of thousands more died when Japan used the diseases created there in biological assaults throughout China. The aftermath added to the horror. After the war, many of Unit 731's leaders were never prosecuted. Instead, the United States offered immunity in exchange for their data, which was gained under torture. Even now, parts of the Japanese archives remain hidden, despite freshly revealed documents revealing the shocking scope of these atrocities. Unit 731 is perhaps the most obvious example of science devoid of all humanity, a place where medical study became indistinguishable from murder. The Guatemala Syphilis Experiments, USA, 1946 to 1948. Not long after the war, another frightening event occurred, this time under the guise of American medical study. Between 1946 and 1948, U.S. Public Health Service doctors, led by Dr. John C. Cutler, conducted secret experiments in Guatemala, infecting over 1,300 persons with sexually transmitted diseases. The subjects, prisoners, soldiers, mental health patients, and even orphans were never told what was happening to them. Many people could not read or speak English. The study aimed to determine whether medications such as penicillin could prevent syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid following exposure. To do this, doctors intentionally infected people with injections or by arranging sexual encounter with infected sex workers. In some cases, they scraped the skins of unaware volunteers, rubbing bacteria right into their wounds. The victims experienced serious illnesses, deformity, and, in many cases, death. Children as little as a year old were experimented on. These experiments were never disclosed, and the victims were forgotten for decades. Historians discovered the data in 2010, generating global uproar. The United States government formally apologized, describing the study as a historic injustice. However, like with so many other tragedies, justice arrived too late for those who suffered. The Guatemala experiments serve as a warning that ethical transgressions are not limited to wartime adversaries. They can occur even in the most civilized countries, under the quiet authority of lab coats and clipboards. The Vipeholm experiments, Sweden, 1945 to 1955. In the years following World War II, Sweden was praised for its neutrality and social improvement. However, something dreadful was happening within the walls of Lund's Vipeholm Hospital. The facility held hundreds of patients with intellectual disabilities, many of whom had little comprehension of what was happening to them. Beginning in 1945, doctors conducted an experiment to determine how sugar-induced tooth decay. Initially disguised as a vitamin test, the study quickly shifted to a more troubling design. Subjects were purposely fed huge amounts of sticky sweets, caramel, and toffee to cause cavities. Over the next decade, over 600 patients were treated to these high-sugar diets, often without the option to refuse. Their teeth decayed, abscessed, and disintegrated, but care was limited to a select minority who were considered high-functioning. Others simply had their shattered teeth out. Researchers measured the rate and pattern of degradation, proudly emphasizing the scientific accuracy of their findings. In purely scientific terms, the study was successful. It established a direct link between sugar and tooth disease, but morally it was unjustifiable. The participants did not provide informed permission, were unaware of the hazards, and had no right to withdraw. They were utilized as data collection tools, with their misery reduced to dental records. The Vipome studies may not have entailed the overt violence of Unit 731, but they did demonstrate a different type of cruelty, the silent, bureaucratic suffering that occurs when society devalues some people. The Milgram Obedience Experiment, USA 1961 to 1963. In the early 1960s, a young psychologist at Yale University, Stanley Milgram, set out to address a troubling question. How could regular individuals perpetrate atrocities like those saw in Nazi Germany? To investigate this, Milgram created one of the most famous and contentious psychological studies of all time. Volunteers were told they were taking part in a study on learning and memory. Each was given the job of teacher and told to administer electric shocks to a learner, actually an actor, if they gave an erroneous answer. The shock machine was labeled with escalating voltages, ranging from gentle jolts to lethal 450 volts. As the experiment went, the actor yelled, begged for mercy, and then fell silent. A calm man in a lab coat persuaded the real participant, who was sitting only feet away, to please continue. The individuals had no idea that no shocks were provided. However, the emotional toll was quite real. Many people sweated, trembled, or burst into tears, thinking that they were hurting someone. 2/3 of the individuals complied until the very end, administering what they considered to be deadly shocks solely because an authority figure instructed them to. Milgram's discoveries astounded the world. Under the appropriate conditions, regular people could commit acts of cruelty with terrifying precision. The experiment established a cornerstone of social psychology, but it also raised serious ethical questions. The participants were duped, frightened, and forced to deal with guilt over their imagined conduct. The Milgram study may not have spilled blood, but it did demonstrate something as disturbing: the ease with which humans can be misled into inflicting pain on themselves and others. The Monster Study, US 1939. Another American experiment, decades before Milgram's, caused less visible but equally terrible harm. In 1939, at the University of Iowa, speech pathologist Wendell Johnson and his graduate student Mary Tudor conducted a study that would later be known as the Monster Study. Their goal was to determine whether stuttering could be caused by psychological pressure rather than biology. The backdrop was the Iowa Soldiers' Orphans' Home, an institution for youngsters without parents to protect them. 22 orphans were separated into groups. Some youngsters who previously stuttered were informed they spoke well, with the goal of enhancing their fluency. The cruelest part, however, included the other youngsters who spoke normally. These innocent children were informed week after week that they had speech problems, stuttered, and should be ashamed of it. The researchers brutally reprimanded them for even tiny errors, sowing the seeds of fear and self-doubt. The results were disastrous. Many of the children who had previously talked smoothly began to hesitate, shrink from speaking, and exhibit stuttering-like signs. They grew introverted, apprehensive, and socially isolated. The experiment was never published, possibly because the researchers realized how unethical it was. It was hidden for decades before journalists discovered it in the early 2000s. In 2007, numerous surviving participants received compensation from the state of Iowa, but no apology could erase the psychological scars left by being informed as a youngster that your voice was broken. What makes these stories so frightening is how commonplace the murders were. They were not all sadists or villains. Many regarded themselves as experts, even pioneers. The doctors of Unit 731 felt they were helping their country. The American psychologists believed they were discovering truths about behavior and speech. The Swedish dentists thought they were helping future generations prevent cavities. Each justified cruelty as necessary, demonstrating that evil frequently wears a scientific guise. Today we benefit from medical and psychological expertise that sprang indirectly from these tragic periods. But that information has a moral cost. Every medical ethics class, consent form we sign, and review board that approves a study exists because individuals suffered while they were absent. Science has given humans incredible abilities to heal, construct, and explore. However, as history has proven, the same power can devastate when compassion is removed. These painful experiments are more than just cautionary stories. They are also mirrors, showing how readily reason can be twisted into justification and how the border between study and torture must never be crossed again. If you found this story as shocking as I did, hit that subscribe button because there are countless more untold truths buried in history waiting to be uncovered.